Hey, folks, good morning and welcome to another episode of Steelers Morning Rush. I'm Alan Saunders. It is Tuesday, December 3rd. The Pittsburgh Steelers are set to, well, I guess Mike Tomlin is set to speak on the South Side today as the Steelers begin their Browns week for the second time this year. Second game against Cleveland coming up this Sunday. And, of course, no practice today, but there will be a practice on Wednesday at UPMC Rooney Sports Complex. Today I want to talk about George Pickens. And I had a question about Deontay Johnson that I will eventually get back to George Pickens about. Somebody asked me if the Ravens cut Deontay Johnson, would the Steelers bring him back for a playoff run? It looks like Johnson is on the outs in Baltimore or something. I don't know. He was benched in his past game, and he has one target since being acquired at the trade deadline from the Carolina Panthers. If the Ravens cut him, would the Steelers bring him back? And I don't really know the answer to that question, but I think, it was pretty clear when the Steelers traded him for what was essentially no return, that they felt like they were better off without Deontay Johnson than with him. That his sort of antics in the locker room and on the team, especially as he entered a contract year, there was a potential for a holdout. The Steelers just didn't want to deal with that guy. Now, maybe that attitude has changed in the meantime. I don't know. I think another part of Deontay Johnson being released was that the Steelers weren't happy with either of their star wide receivers' personalities last year, and that they had to, at the end of this 2024 season, make a decision about whether or not they're going to sign George Pickens for the future. And I think they wanted to get a look at Pickens without another influence, right? Maybe Deontay Johnson was the bad apple here. Let's get rid of him and see how things go with George. Yeah. Things are not going great with George. Things are going great with George on the football field. He's a top 10 wide receiver in the NFL right now, which I don't think, given the Steelers quarterback position, should be ignored. But took two penalties last week, both of them 15 yards. So he gained like 75 yards and lost 30. And it just seems like every other week it's something, whether it's his eye black or it's, him fighting with teammates on the sidelines or saying ridiculous things in the media or whatever. There's no way the Steelers are happy with I don't want to say off the field, but the outside of the whistles, George Pickens. And Mike Tomlin said point blank after the game, he has to grow up. That's about as direct as I've ever heard Mike Tomlin criticize a player in a post-game press conference. I mean, there was no hedging or hemming and hawing. Joey Porter took 6 penalties, and Tomlin was like, well, T. Higgins is pretty good, and we gave him a tough assignment, and he was willing to give lots of excuses for 6 penalties for Joey Porter. He said George Pickens has to grow up. It's very clear they're not happy with, like I said, the outside the whistles person that they're getting in George Pickens. So then what? So I said part of getting rid of Deontay Johnson was they wanted to see George Pickens without another potentially negative influence in that room. Well, now they've got it for a whole year, and it doesn't seem to have changed one bit. In fact, to the point where I think maybe they might be willing to bring Deontay Johnson back just because they should have seen enough to know that he wasn't, at least he had his own problems, got into fights with teammates, he sulked, didn't chase a fumble. Deontay Johnson had his own problems, but it's clear that he wasn't the cause of George Pickens' problems, right? George has his own as well. So maybe they would bring him back. I don't know. But what's going to happen this offseason with George Pickens? And the more, like, we aren't at a place where anyone has to decide that yet. There's still a lot of football to be played. I think there's a lot of time for amends to be made. But man, right now, if the Steelers came into the season so worried about George Pickens' future, they were going to get rid of their second best wide receiver, pay essentially nothing for him, and Deontay Jackson was going to get cut by Carolina. Not that he's been a bad player. In fact, I think he's been a really good player, but his value on the trade market at that moment was essentially nothing because they were going to cut him. So they get essentially nothing for him in the trade value without a plan to replace him. They just said, we don't want you. So if that's the case, like, they were that desperate to see what George Pickens looked like without Deontay Johnson, and now they've seen it, what happens next offseason? if George continues to go down the road that we've seen over the last 2 weeks or the last 3 seasons, are the Steelers going to be willing to open up the pocketbook and give him what is going to have to be a huge contract extension if they want to sign him next offseason? Or are they going to say no and let him go into the season under the final year of his contract like they did with Najee Harris? And what will the reaction to that be? I bet it won't be as professional as Najee Harris has been. And if he does cause a problem, could we be seeing the last of George Pickens in Pittsburgh as these antics pile up? I think that is certainly a possible outcome. The Steelers, just like they did last year with Deontay Johnson, would look to move on from George Pickens this offseason. Like, I don't want to make too much out of 2 penalties, but like those are the stakes here for George Pickens. And you see what the rest of the wide receiver situation is. The Steelers cannot afford to play without him in this season. They can't really afford to not have him next season either. But I don't know that he is doing the things that they are needing him to do in order to earn that contract extension. He was fined by the league and his team over $200,000 last year. I wouldn't be surprised if he's on pace for more this year. He's already had 3 fines from the NFL. Could have 1 or 2 more coming from last week's game. Like, these are the things that, make teams not want to pay really good players. So, like, Smitty asked me about the finger gun penalty, and I don't really like that rule. But if you're George Pickens right now, you got to understand what's at stake, and yeah, even if it is a stupid rule, you got to find a way to show that you can color within the lines. And either he's incapable or he's uninterested to this point, and he's running out of time, I think, to make that kind of statement that, yes, I am someone that you should want to pay $100 million for and to tie the rest of your offense to for years and years to come, because I can be trusted to be a mature adult when it really counts. I don't know that he's done those things. And I think it's put the Steelers in a really tough position going forward to this offseason. Like I said, there is still a lot of football left. There's always Mike Tomlin is always going to give players lots and lots of chances. I just I don't see right now George Pickens taking advantage of those. Will Deontay Johnson be back? I don't know. I think the Ravens would be crazy to cut him, but I don't know what's happening over there. And I'm a little skeptical that the Steelers would bring him back, but maybe. I'll leave the door open. It's possible. That's all I got for today. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Make sure you like, subscribe, hit that bell for notifications here on the YouTube channel. And I'll be back with more with Steelers Afternoon Drive with Smitty just around 6 o'clock. Until then, enjoy.